support. I work for victim support in Cardiff, although I cover Gwent, which is a different sort of part of Wales, it's sort of southeast Wales, and I'm a training and engagement officer. So I will essentially go around sort of organisations and sort of grassroots groups talking about hate crime, raising awareness of hate crime, and really letting people know, you know, how they can report hate crime and how to access support. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think before we start, it would be really useful if we could perhaps have a bit of a show of hands in terms of oh, actually, we've got a lot of people off camera here, yeah. But I think for the people that are on camera, can I sort of ask you, on a scale maybe of 1 to 10, what do you think your knowledge of hate crime is? And I think if you can just maybe hold up, you know, 1 to 10, how many fingers worth does that represent? So 5, 6, 7, yeah. I think that's 8. I think we've got 7, 8. Yeah, there or thereabouts. Yeah. So I'm just going to take a quick photo of that. Thank you. Yeah, so I think it sort of will vary from person to person, but I think certainly for us, let's just get rid of that. Certainly for a lot of people, they really don't understand, you know, what hate crime is, let alone be able to report it. So I mean, I think hopefully this session will help you, the people that you work with, to understand a little bit more about it, a little bit more in depth about it, and where to go for help and support. So in terms of the outcomes of this session, what I would hope that you go away with is perhaps a little bit of a better understanding of what hate crime is all about. Oh, can we just have everyone on? Yeah, we go. And we'll talk about the definition of hate crime, who it affects, and what we call the protected group. So essentially the people that are vulnerable to hate crime or could be subjected to hate crime in some way. We'll talk about the impacts of hate crime and what it does to people, you know, at an individual level, and those impacts can be incredibly profound and serious. And we'll talk about reporting, and there's quite a lot of things around reporting. So how to report, why it's important to report, what happens when you do report a hate crime. And then, you know, we'll talk a little bit about the supports that people can get if they've been affected by a hate crime. So I'll move on to the definition. I think, Mario, if you can keep it just eye on chat and shout out if there's anything you want me to repeat or go through again, or if there's any questions as we're going through. But when we talk about hate crime, it's essentially an illegal act, a criminal act of hostility against you or somebody because of who they are, who you are, and what they represent. So essentially, it's an attack on somebody's identity or part of their identity. And because of that, it's incredibly personal in nature. So if somebody has targeted you out, singled you out because of your identity, you know, it's not an opportunistic crime. So it's not like having perhaps, you know, your car broken into, or you know, your house being burgled, and all those things are incredibly distressing and upsetting for people. They're committed as acts sort of opportunistic crime. So people have seen an opportunity and they've gone for it. It's not being done because of a personal reason, because the color of your skin, because of your sexual orientation, or the way that you identify in terms of your gender. Yeah. So hate crime is an incredibly personal crime in its nature. So let's talk about the protected groups a little bit. And, you know, I'm not going to talk in a huge amount about these, but it's just to give you an awareness that these 5 groups are what we call the protected groups, and they are potentially people that are vulnerable or perhaps open to having hate crimes committed against them. So if we look at all of these groups in turn, we have religion and faith. And, you know, that could be any religion, you know, but I think we certainly know that I think around 50% of hate crimes based on religion are actually hate crimes against Muslim people and acts of Islamophobia. So, you know, that takes up, you know, if you think proportionally, you know, the number of Muslim people in this country, that's a really high proportion. And certainly there will be sort of external events that will trigger sort of a rise in hate crime or, you know, Islamophobia. So, you know, if there are terrorist attacks, for example, we will see, you know, we will see attacks, you know, of Islamophobia taking place shortly after. We see a sort of spike in those types of crime. And also within this group, we have non-faith. So, you know, people can also be targeted because they don't believe, but it all comes under that religion and faith umbrella. When we talk about race, yes, that can be, you know, people are, you know, victims of hate crime because of the color of their skin, but, you know, not always. So it could be the language that people speak, you know, and perhaps you can hear somebody's accent is that, you know, perhaps they weren't born in the UK. It can be perhaps of the culture they identify with. It could be the clothing they wear. You know, it could be their nationality. And within that, you know, we have groups such as the Gypsy Roma traveller community. We have people perhaps from Eastern Europe, you know, so people that are perhaps white, but, you know, they can still be subjected to race hate crimes. With transgender, so trans, so we talk about trans and the trans community, but trans is really an umbrella term, so it sort of covers a sort of wide range of people, and essentially we're talking about people that don't identify with the gender that they were given at birth. Okay, so that could be that a child is born, you know, and at birth the doctor, you know, attending the birth, looks at the child, makes a decision that that child is female based on, you know, their external sort of sexual organs, or the child might grow up feeling that, okay, I've been given this gender of female, but actually I feel that I'm male inside, or vice versa. So children can be born as male and they can grow up and they can feel, you know, that they are, you know, inside they strongly identify with being male. So, you know, it works both ways. But we also have people that perhaps feel somewhere in between, or they don't feel either. Whatever the reason, you know, it's just a difference, you know, and you know, it is a reason that people are singled out, targeted because they're different. Okay, and I think here's the sort of key thing. But the bottom line is they have the right to live their lives, you know, as they wish. They should be able to express their gender in a way that they want to express their gender. You know, there is nothing wrong with them. You know, they just identify differently from the mainstream in terms of their gender. When we talk about disability, now that can be someone with a physical disability, so perhaps they're a wheelchair user, perhaps they use you know, a walking stick or a walking aid, so perhaps it's more obvious that they have a disability. But also there are a whole range of sort of what we would call hidden disabilities. So within that you could have perhaps long-term health conditions, so perhaps things like, you know, multiple sclerosis, you know, that may not be sort of immediately obvious. You know, yes, some people with MS will use wheelchairs and so on, but some don't. It could be conditions like epilepsy or diabetes. It can certainly be mental health conditions. So, you know, anything like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, or, you know, at the other end of the scale, we have things like schizophrenia. You know, these are all reasons that people can be targeted. Also within this group, we have people with learning disabilities and neurodiverse conditions such as um, autism or Asperger's syndrome. So, if we look at disability as a whole, it covers a huge range of different disabilities and will affect a huge group of people. And finally, sexual orientation. So basically who we are romantically or sexually attracted to. So that could be that somebody is a gay man. So, they are sexually and romantically attracted to other men. It could be a gay woman or lesbian, a woman attracted to another woman, perhaps somebody that is attracted to both, in which case, we would say they were bisexual. But also within that, we have other sort of iterations. So perhaps someone might describe themselves as asexual, for example. So they don't particularly have sexual feelings, but they may be romantically attracted to a different, to another person. So again, it covers quite a wide range of sort of characteristics for different people. So I'll move on. Okay, so we'll talk about why it's important to report hate crime, but I think it's also incredibly important to recognise that there are some barriers to reporting hate crime as well for all groups of people. And I think I've tried to focus on the ones that perhaps would be more relevant to people that are perhaps asylum seekers or migrants to the UK. And I think the sort of key thing, I think that the hate crime figures for 2021 have just been released. I haven't looked at them in any depth, but I understand there has been quite a big increase, and it's about 120,000 hate crimes committed in the UK last year. What I will say is that yes, that figure is increasing year on year, but also that we know that certain groups won't report hate crime for a number of different reasons, and because of that, hate crime is still significantly underreported. And it's really important that we do start reporting it, and we'll talk about why a little bit later, but let's just look at some of those barriers now. So first of all, there is that fear that it will affect people's claim for asylum, that it will affect their accommodation or their housing support. And I think I cannot stress this enough. If you're talking to people, if you are the person that is, in that position and you're claiming asylum, none of those things should be affected. You absolutely have the right to report hate crime if you've been a victim of hate crime, and you have the right to be taken seriously and to have that recorded by the police or by a third party agency, and action taken. It should not affect your asylum claim. It should not affect your accommodation or housing support. I cannot emphasize that enough. Is people still have rights. Yeah. So regardless of your asylum status, if a hate crime is committed against you, you still have the right to report that without your own rights being affected and without your asylum claim being put at risk. We see sometimes, a lack of trust in the police and, and state authorities. And, there could be a number of reasons for that. Certainly, if people have lived in the UK a long time, it could be that they have, perhaps not received very good treatment from the police and they don't want to go back there. And certainly if people come from a country where the police and state are very much something to be feared, and people have been, perhaps, really badly treated by the police, which is why, they're seeking asylum in the UK. But, the bottom line is, you have the right in the UK to be taken seriously. You have the right to report hate crime, and you have the right to live without fear. Okay. There are sometimes language barriers that will stop people from reporting hate crime. So if English isn't your first language, then all agencies, so certainly victim support, the police, all agencies that are tied up and involved in the criminal justice system absolutely have to and are obliged to provide translation services. So if English isn't your first language, you absolutely have the right to be given a translator so you can express yourself in your mother tongue, if that's what you want to do. So those translation services are available and it's your right to ask for them. Sometimes there are sort of cultural barriers or reasons perhaps that people don't report hate crime, or they don't know that a crime has been committed. In the UK, there will be cultural differences. So things like women's right to work and become leaders, people's right to express their sexual orientation or identity and their gender identity. This is not against the law in the UK, and that you won't be singled out and targeted, by the authorities for those reasons. But we know that's not always the case in some countries. Some people just don't know where to go, so there's a lack of information. I think hopefully, this session is a step in the right direction in terms of providing people with the information that they need. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be some sort of contact numbers for people to report hate crime or to ask for help and support. And then, we have the sort of what we call normalizing of hate crime. So this is essentially where people live with it day in, day out. It becomes normal, it becomes accepted. And I guess, what I would say is that it's absolutely not acceptable for anybody to become the focus of negative attention and hate crime. And by accepting that negative behavior and those negative attitudes, there's a risk it becomes normal in our society. So certainly for us is that, if we accept these things that, oh, it's just going to happen to me and I can't do anything about it, we're almost saying that it's okay, for people to behave like that. And it absolutely isn't. So, again, it's a really good reason for reporting, because you're actually putting your hand up and saying, no, this is wrong. This should not be happening to me. This is not normal. And we don't want it to become normal. And I think finally, perhaps in some sort of cultures, in some countries, it is still illegal to be, to be gay, to be transgender, to be bisexual. And, some people will be afraid that, if they come out, and if they go to the police about something, that they will get into trouble because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And this absolutely isn't true. So although there may be, out in the sort of general population, yes, let's not say that there aren't those negative attitudes, they are there, but it is absolutely not illegal, and people won't be punished, by the courts, by the police, for identifying in terms of their sort of sexual orientation, identifying in a different way, or in terms of their gender. Okay. So there are many different types of hate crime. So a huge range of different crimes that people can be subjected to. So that could be being pushed, threatened, hassled, someone sort of following you in the street and giving you a hard time, having things thrown at you or being spat at, being physically assaulted in some way. So being kicked, being beaten, being punched, being slapped, all of those things count as physical assault and they're against the law. It could be that the abuse that you're getting is from a neighbour, and just because they're your neighbour, it does not mean that they shouldn't be held accountable for what they're doing. Yes, it can be more difficult for people because they don't want, perhaps, they'll think things will get worse. And again, just to emphasize, there are still support agencies that you can go to for help and support. You don't necessarily have to go to the police, and we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail later. Other types of hate crime that people might experience are perhaps arson, someone setting fire to your home or your property, or other damage, such as perhaps eggs being thrown at your property, or graffiti sprayed on your door or your windows or your car, and all these things are against the law. We can also see sort of non-verbal offensive gestures being made towards people. And I think generally people being bullied or shouted at or ridiculed because of their race, their religion, their disability, sexuality, or gender identity. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of hate crime and what it can do to people that actually experience it. And I think let's just go back to the beginning where we talked about the nature of hate crime and the fact that it's an attack on people's identity. And it's a very personal attack. And for that reason, it can be that much more significant, damaging for people. And I think there are studies that have shown that hate crime can be, I think, up to 4 times more of an impact than other types of crime. So we broadly sort of cut this into sort of 4 different areas in terms of impact. So first of all, we can talk about the emotional impact. Now, people can experience a huge range of different emotions when they've experienced hate crime. Now, that can be anger, which is incredibly easy to understand why people feel angry that this injustice has been done against them. It can be people crying uncontrollably because of the shock and the hurt and the pain. It can be people being very fearful and actually being afraid for their friends, for their family, for themselves, that this is going to happen again. We can see people starting to feel mistrustful about the society they live in, mistrustful about the people perhaps they work with or they meet on a day-to-day basis. And, we also have people experiencing really profound feelings of shame. And I think although, again, it's something quite natural and it happens quite a lot, really, what I would say here is that it is not you as the victim of crime that should be feeling shame. It is the person that committed the offence against you that should be feeling shame. And although you may feel you could have done more, you could have said more to defend yourself, perhaps defend your family, defend your friends, at the end of the day, it's not you that has committed a crime. You have been the victim of crime, and it is the offender, should be held to account, and you have nothing to feel ashamed for. So a whole sort of different range, of emotions that people can feel and experience. And I think because of all those different emotions, those different feelings, we can start to see impacts in terms of people's mental health and mental well-being. So, you're living with sort of constant fear, constant worry. We can see people developing, serious long-term mental health conditions like depression, like anxiety, like post-traumatic stress disorder. We have people suffering from insomnia because they're hypervigilant and they don't feel comfortable, within their own homes. And again, that can lead to mental health problems. We can also see that people have, perhaps physical injuries that, again, we can see that ranging from, you might have sort of cuts and bruises, but some people are left with life-changing injuries following a hate crime incident. If we talk about behaviour, we can see changes in the way that people behave following a hate crime. So that could be perhaps people are afraid to leave their own homes, so they stay locked up, they don't want to go out. Perhaps they will stop doing things that they used to enjoy before. It could be going out and about in the community, seeing friends, seeing family, perhaps going to a place of worship. People can start using or perhaps increase the use of drugs and alcohol as a means of coping and as a way of feeling, at least on a temporary basis, feeling a little bit better about themselves. And although those things long term don't help, it's something that people will do to try and sort of ease the pain and take away, those sort of horrible feelings that they're experiencing. We can also see people that, feel afraid to actually be in their own home. If you're being targeted where you live, and the attacks are, people sort of, banging on your window, constantly harassing you where you live, you're not going to feel safe in your own home. So, the answer to that is to try, perhaps, and move. Perhaps it's to stay with friends and family. But, we see people driven out of their own homes because they don't feel safe where they live. And, we can see people who will conceal their identity. So they try and hide who they are, when they're out in public. So it could be, if you're gay, for example, you might not want to sort of show any sort of affection towards your partner. If you're out in public, it could be changing the way that you dress. It could be, if you speak with a different accent. It could be that you're nervous or you're wary about speaking in public because you think as soon as you open your mouth and you start talking, people are going to, zone in on you and identify the fact that, perhaps you weren't born in the UK, and it makes you a target. So, we see all these sort of changes to the way that people can behave following a hate crime. So if we look at the financial impacts, and I think, again, it's something that will cause, more worry and stress to people, but there can be the costs of perhaps getting your property repaired if it's been damaged, or you've had graffiti on your home or on your car. It could be that, you have to pay more insurance, but it could be loss of earnings. So if people are working, it could mean that they lose their job because they're afraid to go into work. Perhaps they've got a mental health problem now, or physical injury that means they're unable to work. It could be that the hate crime took place on the way to work, or it could be that the hate crime took place in the place of work. Now, if that happens, then you're not going to want to go back there. And, essentially it means that you've lost your job or you're unable to work because a crime has been committed against you. Okay, so we could probably talk about for hours on this subject, but I think those are a few of the sort of perhaps more obvious impacts that hate crime can have on people who experience it. So what actually happens then when a crime is reported? So first of all, a statement will be taken by the police. And I think just being very clear here, it is not down to anybody as a victim of crime to prove that a crime has taken place. Yeah, that's down to the police to investigate and find out. If you do have evidence, for example, if you're aware that there was a street camera, in the vicinity when the hate crime occurred, or if you've got mobile phone footage, then certainly that's something that could potentially be used as evidence. But again, things to remember are, perhaps key things are to remember where it happened, what happened, was there any injury, how were you left feeling, what time was it, what date was it. And I think the key thing to remember is that the police will be aware that anybody that's subjected to a crime, especially a hate crime, will be distressed. They might not have perfect recall, and it may be that you remember things afterwards that perhaps you didn't remember when you gave a statement, and that's absolutely fine. I think it will be understood that you've been extremely sort of stressed when you're giving a statement, and I think that will be recognised. I think, again, going back to the sort of language barrier, if language, if English is not your first language, then just a reminder that you have the right to give that statement in your own words, in your own language, and translation services have to be provided. The offence or the incident will then be investigated by the police, and a decision will be made on whether to prosecute. Now, that could be that the police, think that they don't have enough. It could be the Crown Prosecution Service will examine the evidence and decide that there isn't enough evidence for it to go to court. But nevertheless, that is the process that it will go through. And it could be that a decision is made that, yes, there is evidence, we think there's a case, we will go to court. And if that happens, a victim impact statement will be taken if the case goes to court. And really, that's the victim expressing in their own words what the hate crime has done to them, how it's made them feel, how it's changed their life, what it's done to their behavior and it's done to their family, and how it's changed their lives. And that statement will be read out in court, and it can either be read out by the victim or it can be read out on their behalf by somebody else. And that's really to make it clear to the judge or to the person presiding over the case or the jury, what this has done to you as an individual. So that's something that if sentencing does take place, then that's something that will be taken into consideration. And I think finally to be aware that you should be considered for special measures as a victim of hate crime, and that could be having a translator in court with you. It could be that you're able to give evidence via a video link, rather than actually appear in court, or it could be that you give evidence from behind a screen. That's something the police and witness services will work with you on and understand, whether they can do something to give you a bit of extra protection when you're going through the process. And I think, again, just to reiterate, as a victim of crime, you have done nothing wrong. So again, just to repeat, status, housing, benefits won't be affected. So whether you just report the hate crime and nothing happens, or whether it goes through the process and you go to court, it won't have an effect on your asylum claim. It won't have an effect on your housing. It won't have an effect on your benefits. Okay, so I can't emphasize that enough, because we know it's a reason that people don't report hate crime. So some people have experienced hate crime previously, or perhaps they know someone that has, and they reported it and nothing happens. So I think it's still important to report it, because it may stop it happening to someone else. It will show us, and when I say us, I mean all sort of agencies, so Migrant Rights UK, Victim Support, Migrant Help, local authorities, schools, all of these different sort of organisations and institutions will want to know, if there's a problem or there's a particular concern in your area about hate crime. And it also helps police get a better understanding of hate crime where they live. So really important that you do report it, even if nothing happens. You could report it 9 times, and it could be, there isn't enough evidence. Perhaps on that 10th time, there will be, and then the police can take action, the courts can take action. But what I would say is that even if you feel nothing's going to happen, or you don't feel there's evidence, remember, it's not down to you to prove, it's down to the police. But it still, ideally should be reported, because it helps us get that picture of what's going on. And as I said, we know hate crime is really underreported. So the more people report it, the clearer the picture we get, and we have a real understanding of what's happening in the community and what the true picture is in terms of hate crime in the UK. So what if the police don't listen to me? And I think something else I'll kind of add into that is that some people will have been, perhaps the offender was actually someone from within the police force. And what I would say there is absolutely it should still be reported as a hate crime, even if it was, a police officer that committed that offence. And if you feel when you're reporting a hate crime if you believe you've been treated unfairly, you haven't been listened to, you haven't been taken seriously, there are organisations and people that can help you to make a complaint, and it is your right to do that. You can either do this, if you feel comfortable going to the police station and asking to make a complaint about the way that you've been treated, you can do that. You could contact your local MP or assembly member if you live in Wales. There's an organisation called the Police Action Centre as well, that are an independent body that investigate allegations or claims against the police and the way the police have behaved. But also like organisations like this, like Migrant Rights, like Migrant Help UK, will help you in terms of raising a complaint. And again, can't emphasise it enough, it is your right to complain. Under it's something called the Victims Code, that was really a sort of set of rules, if you like, set out by the Ministry of Justice, and that says that everybody has the right to complain, and every organisation that is either in the criminal justice system or working with the criminal justice system and the police has to have a complaints procedure. So please don't feel afraid that you can't complain, because you absolutely can if you don't think that you've had the treatment that you deserve, and recognition of what's happened to you, and to be taken seriously. So just moving on to sort of help and support the victim support provides. And as I said a little bit earlier in the presentation, we are an independent organisation, so we are not the police. Certainly we can work with the police in terms of advocacy. So perhaps if you've reported something to the police and they've taken a while to get back to you, that's something we can help with. We can chase things up. We can work with housing associations, local councils and so on. If you've got a particular problem with a neighbour, or your property's been vandalised or had graffiti on it, we can help you get that sort of cleared up. Perhaps sort of advocate for you to be moved, or for something to be done about a neighbour if it's them causing a problem. We are a third-party reporting centre, so people can come direct to us and we can report to the police on their behalf, or they can just come direct to us for help and support. So as I said, it doesn't have to go to the police, but we can do that for you. I think a lot of what we do and what our caseworkers do is to provide emotional support to people. And I think let's look back again, at those emotional impacts and those profound changes that people experience following a hate crime. So emotional support is incredibly important to kind of help people on the road to recovery and to get over what's happened to them. Now that could be face to face, it could be on the telephone, but it's incredibly important that people are given the time, the space to tell their story, to express how they're feeling in a sort of environment where they're not going to be judged, where they're going to be taken seriously, where their experience, and how they've reacted to it is very much going to be validated and treated with empathy, and that's so important, that people have the time and the space to do that and to talk in the way that they want to talk. And everything they say to us, will be confidential. Is the only time, that we there are a couple of reasons that we will break confidentiality. That will be, if we believe somebody is at risk, or, somebody associated is at risk of harm, then we would. But, the rule of thumb is that, whatever you say to us is completely confidential. So, it could be that you just want a bit of time to vent, and express your anger, about the injustice. It could be that, you're deeply depressed and you want some support on an ongoing basis. And that's something that we can do for you. And I think the important thing to say here about all of our services is that, once you come to us, you have a caseworker assigned to you. They will work with you and really come up with a sort of plan of action, if you like, that's determined by you, the service user. So we don't try and force people down a particular route. You know, all of our sort of plans, our recovery plans, if you like, are led by the service user, and it can be, you know, the support can be as involved or as detailed as you like, or it could just be, you know, perhaps you just want a couple of weeks where you just want to sort of chat and sort of vent how you're feeling to somebody. It could be that you just want something like a personal alarm or home security. It could be that you require emotional support for an ongoing period, and that could be as long as you need it. Okay, victim support will be there for you. So again, you know, the sort of aim of working with people and working closely with people, and the caseworker relationship with the service user, a lot of it will be about building confidence and resilience. So this is something that will really have taken a knock as a result of a hate crime being committed. So as I said, referenced earlier, you know, there are personal safety alarms that we can sometimes issue to people. Likewise with home security, if people are feeling unsafe in their own homes, we can provide them with sort of sometimes window and door locks to make them feel a little bit safer. We can also work with, you know, to get people compensation, you know, if they've had some sort of injury result of a hate crime. We can't get involved in the process, but we can make sure people know where to go to claim compensation. And, you know, we can, you know, if people want us to, provide other sort of types of practical support. So that could be things like filling in an insurance claim. It could be linking people in with other organisations, perhaps, that are specialists and provide specialist support to them, and kind of brokering, you know, a relationship there. And lastly, you know, as we're doing today, is we like to talk to different organisations and community groups to raise awareness of hate crime and to make people know where they can go to get help and support. So in terms of actually reporting hate crime, certainly if you feel confident and you're comfortable to do this, you can either call the police if it's an emergency on 999 or 101, you know, if it's not emergency and there's, you know, you're not an immediate risk. But you can use a third-party reporting centre if you don't want to go to the police. Now, victim support, certainly in Wales, have our own hate crime team, but there are other organisations such as True Vision, you know, in other parts of the UK that will report hate crime on your behalf. In victim support, you know, it could be that you tell us straight away that you want to report to the police and you want us to do that, and that's absolutely fine. If it's something that you need a little bit of time to think about, and perhaps to think about, you know, what could potentially happen, you know, if I report to the police, what will happen if I don't? That's something that a caseworker would discuss with you. And again, we wouldn't force anybody, or we wouldn't try and push anyone down a particular route in terms of reporting hate crime. What we would do is discuss the sort of pros and cons. So if you report it, what could be the results? If you don't report it, what might happen? So, you know, it's very much down to the service user or the victim to decide whether they want to do that or not. And people can remain anonymous. So, you know, absolutely, if you just want to report the hate crime and move on, you don't have to share anything that you're not comfortable with. So a lot of people find it easier to report online. So certainly we've got and we'll share this pack afterwards with everybody that's attended, is you can report online to True Vision or Victim Support in Wales, or we've got some other sort of contact details for Victim Support. There is, we've got our 24/7 helpline there. As I said, you can go online with victim support and report it, and there is a online form where you're asking for help, so you don't have to talk to anyone at that point in time if you don't want to. or we do have 24/7 live chat for people. So if you really feel you need to talk to someone straight away, then absolutely you can. And again, just to emphasize, if English isn't your first language, we can use a language interpreting service, you know, just so you can express yourself in the way that you want to express yourself. And I think finally, and I think Malia referenced this at the start of the pack, and I think you've put something up in chat, is that, you know, there is a booklet, and I think there's a lot of information in there about knowing your rights. And I think it's really important that people sort of access that and look at that information and get that sort of deeper understanding in terms of their rights in relation to hate crime. So that's it from me. So has anyone got any questions?
I've just seen one come into the chat. Can you report to victim support if you live in England, or do we need to report via True Vision?
I believe, I don't know whether you've got Jess, and I still think you can report to victim support if you live in England. It's just that in Wales we have a specific hate crime team, but at the end of the day a crime has still been committed. So, you know, you've got the sort of the 0800 number that's up there that you can report to or go online.
Can I just come in there? Sorry.
Yeah.
Hi, Kathy. Okay. Yeah. So as Kathy said, it may vary by local area and local contracts, but if you call the number that is listed, they'll be able to help you and sort of signpost you to a local office to see whether they'll do that for you. If not, there is always True Vision, and if you live in Wales, like Kathy has said, it's a specific reporting centre that's been set up.
Thank you. Thanks, Jess.
Does anyone else have any questions? You could either raise your hand or put it in the chat box. There was one person earlier sharing that they felt frustrated that the media essentially continues a lot of these harmful narratives that essentially lead to hate crime and division. And I was wondering if maybe you had any advice that you could give to that person, or any suggestions of kind of how to view that sort of.
Okay, and I think Jess was quite timely because we had the online sort of hate seminar, webinar yesterday. But absolutely, you know, we're very aware that, you know, social media plays a big part in terms of promoting hate crime, in terms of promoting hate, you know, within our communities. Certainly, you know, we would say it should still be reported. So certainly report it to the platform involved, and, you know, if needs be, report it to either to True Vision, to victim support, even to the police, because if what's being said is you know, deemed, you know, offensive, you know, and likely to cause more hate crime, then absolutely it should be reported. Jess, you got anything to add to that? I'm just conscious that we obviously had the session yesterday. Is there anything in there that we could sort of expand on?
I don't think so, Kathy. I think you've covered it there. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Someone's asked, do you have any printed online resources in different languages?
We do have, certainly in victim support, we do have things in different languages that we can share in Wales. I think they're probably specific to Wales though, Jess.
Yeah, we do have one specific to Wales, but they would be available for places in England as well. The local team would just need to request them, but yes, we do.
Fine. Okay.
Another person's asked, can victim support help individuals for whom the hate crime is on social media? And if so, in removing it? If not, who can?
I'm not sure that we could help remove it as such. However, we can provide support to that person, because obviously they're still a victim of crime. And certainly I would say, you know, as we just said earlier, is that certainly contact the platform and ask them to report it. And again, you could report it to us as a crime, and we could potentially work, you know, and flag it to the police to see if we could get them involved as well. It's more difficult in terms of, you know, getting the platforms to remove things. A lot of them aren't based in the UK, you know, where we don't necessarily have sort of jurisdiction. But yeah, absolutely, I would say contact us and we would sort of discuss the sort of next steps and what could be done. But certainly, you know, one of those things would be contacting the social media platform and asking them to remove the comment and potentially to deplatform or to remove the person from that social media site. It's not going to be as straightforward. I'd like to say, you know, it's a simple process and you just ask and it will be done. But you should still ask, you know, and I think that's the sort of message, is that yes, it may be difficult, but please still do it, you know, report it and contact the platform.
Great. Another person's asked, are there any community groups or meetups where caseworkers are able to signpost people who perhaps miss out on community or would like a safe space where they can talk about their experiences of hate crime, more so within Cardiff and Wales?
I guess what we can do, I think if it is particularly Wales, what I can do is share the details of our team. So we can certainly organise sort of events, you know, go out to community groups and sort of talk to people. So I think it will depend on the area, and I think it's something that we do and tailor to groups or to people on an individual basis. But certainly, you know, that's, you know, I guess part of what our team do is to give platforms to people to sort of talk about their experiences and their hate crime. And certainly, you know, if they don't need support and they just want to talk about it, you know, we can work with communities to perhaps set up groups to do that.
Great. Another person's asked, can you say anything about the hate crime bill coming into place next year to support victims and those wishing to commit suicide as there is no choice left?
Not something that I'm particularly knowledgeable about, I'm afraid. Jess, I don't know if that's something you know more about.
Just very little that I know that it's going to be quite focused on prevention of hate crime. That sort of seems to be the main sort of themes of it so far. Obviously, that's an area of work that we're involved in, but our main sort of body of work is supporting people after they've experienced hate crime. And so what was the second part around?
I think, you know, if you're feeling like quite hopeless, what options are there for you?
To access support, you know, as Kathy sort of gone into today, whether you live in England or Wales, victim support has a service for you, but also to look at, you know, sort of your networks and go into your GP if you do feel that, you know, you're feeling suicidal as a result of hate crime that you've experienced.
Someone's also asked if you're able to share details for support for victims in London, if there's any victim support details. I don't see any other questions. I'm just scrolling up in the chat. One person had highlighted that another barrier could be having a bad experience after supporting a prosecution. Is there any advice that you would give if someone is supporting a prosecution about kind of the mental health issues that might come with that as well, and subsequent hate crime?
And I guess it's really going back to the, you know, we provide quite a holistic service in victim support. So certainly people's mental health is something that, you know, we're very aware of, as taking a significant knock, you know, if you like, you know, when they've been subjected to hate crime. So we would, I think, you know, we'd work with people on a case by case basis. Certainly we'd advocate people to go and seek help from their GP. But, you know, when somebody comes to us and they've reported a hate crime, we will be with them as long as they need. And that could be going through the entire process. It could be after the process. So somebody's been through that sort of prosecution and, you know, it's had a detrimental impact on them. So certainly it's something that we would work with individuals on.
Great. Another person has shared that they had attended a hate crime seminar and they were told it was very easy to report hate crime via social media, and that maybe they struggled to do that. Maybe as a follow-up, we can send some tips about how to report on social media, because maybe that's not as straightforward.
Yeah, and I'm not aware, I don't think we specifically report on social media. We do have a social media presence in victim support, but I think we don't, Jess, I don't know whether there are any plans to sort of change this, but I don't think we might promote reporting on social media, but I don't think we actually use it as a means to report hate crime at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so we wouldn't necessarily be responsible for reporting somebody's sort of comments or anything to the social media provider. But we, like Kathy has said, we'd work with them to tell them what they need to do in order to make that report to that social media provider, or work with police to help get the content removed, depending on what it is. I think the issue, and it's what we touched upon yesterday with online hate, is the scale of it is so massive, and it can be so varied, and it is a lot of case by case basis. So to say categorically we wouldn't help you support sort of reporting that on Facebook or Twitter, whatever it was, there may be circumstances where that's something that we would do. It does have to be taken on a case by case basis. But Kathy is right in saying that ultimately we would be working with you for you to report that to the social media provider.
Yeah, so I think afterwards we will send the slide out, and that will have information about how to report, how to get in touch with victim support. So we definitely encourage you afterwards to get in touch. Is there any other questions? Otherwise, we could finish a bit early. Also, if you don't have any questions right now, but one comes up later, feel free to send an email. We'll be sharing all the details, relevant details, and then we can get in touch with you with an answer. But if that is all, maybe I'll just say thank you so much to Kathy and to Jess for all your amazing support and for sharing this really helpful knowledge with everyone. And thanks so much for everyone that has attended today. It was really, really brilliant, and certainly useful to help us understand how to report. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, please do get in touch. Otherwise, have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.